was in a bath of water and it's completely blood-filled, where he'd been dunked up and down. He did admit the murder even before they got back to Gravesend. In fact, as soon as he got in the car, he admitted Father Crean's murder.
During the 1970s, the landscape of London's wealthiest neighbourhoods areas, such as Chelsea and Knightsbridge, underwent a disturbing transformation. These districts, usually renowned for their luxury boutiques, elegant homes, and the presence of influential society figures, found their tranquility shattered by a series of increasingly alarming crimes. The Metropolitan Police, long accustomed to petty theft and the occasional robbery in these affluent quarters, faced an extraordinary and deeply troubling wave of violence. Unfolding over several months, this crime spree confounded investigators and terrified the city's residents.
He exploited that. He murdered them. He cut short their lives. And there are some people whose offending is so far beyond the pale that they really must gasp their last breath behind bars.
The incidents began with a pattern of muggings, street robberies, and handbag snatches targeting the elderly and vulnerable among London's elite. What at first seemed to be typical, but notably bold petty thefts, soon escalated into something far more menacing. Old women, many living alone, began to die under suspicious circumstances. In these affluent boroughs, the sense that anyone, even in a seemingly safe environment, could suddenly become a victim eroded the veneer of security that wealth typically bought. The perpetrator was later identified as Patrick Mackay, a deeply disturbed young man whose actions soon placed him at the center of nationwide obsession and police urgency. Early accounts painted Mackay as a person who had shown troubling behavior since childhood. Teachers and acquaintances described him in retrospect as someone exhibiting warning signs of extreme violence, especially toward women. Some even went so far as to refer to him as a potential murderer of women, though none could have envisioned the scale or savagery of his crimes. Throughout the mid-1970s, Mackay prowled the fashionable districts bordering London's King's Road, spreading unease among residents and police alike. The crime soon began to display a frightening escalation. Not merely content with theft, the perpetrator employed extraordinary violence against his victims. Detectives struggled to connect the dots, as the attacks appeared seemingly random, with little initial forensic evidence or clear motivation. One of the earliest murders to deeply shock London occurred in early 1974. Isabella Griffiths, the elderly widow of a respected surgeon, resided in an elegant home on Chain Walk, an address matching her social standing. She was brutally attacked, likely strangled, and then stabbed with such force that the knife was driven through her torso and embedded into the floor. Her body lay undiscovered for nearly 2 weeks. The nature of the wounds and the apparent trust she had placed in her killer hinted at a relationship built on manipulation and deceit.
Well, in fact, I'll tell you what I'll do.
Just to tell you that Mackay's arrived safely, no problems with the escort. That seems to have gone okay, and his personal officer's taking him for a tour of the unit now.
You're sure no one wants to speak?
He's got the thing we don't have. Where are they going?
If anything, I think the staff's morale's better than mine.
Despite the brutality of the act, investigators found themselves with virtually no concrete leads. The murderer had left behind little physical evidence, and the investigative tools of the era were limited. The crime underscored the vulnerability of affluent elderly women in even the most secure surroundings, especially when their would-be helper was, in truth, the architect of their demise. Over the months that followed, the pattern repeated. Petty crimes continued to surge in neighborhoods known for their exclusivity and safety, yet the spectre of murder loomed larger each time another victim was discovered. Tensions reached new heights in March 1975 with the murder of Adele Price, a resident of another stately London square. As with Mrs. Griffiths, the perpetrator managed to gain her trust perhaps by feigning the need for a glass of water or offering help with daily chores. Once inside her home, he betrayed this trust with a lethal attack, strangling her and leaving when her granddaughter was returning. Unaware of the horror awaiting her, the granddaughter encountered Mackay as he was leaving and, in her innocence, did not recognize the danger. On entering the home, she found a door locked from the outside, and on forcing it open, discovered her grandmother's body. Her screams brought the police, who, upon learning of the locked door and other suspicious details, declared the home a crime scene. This series of gruesome crimes convinced the Metropolitan Police that they were facing an individual possessed not only of cunning and audacity, but chilling violence and unpredictability. The police response became desperate as the possibility loomed that an unchecked serial killer was stalking the city. Additional officers were drafted into a supplementary murder squad, as officials feared the situation might descend into one of the most lethal killing sprees London had ever witnessed. Frustration compounded for detectives as modern forensic science was still in its infancy. There was no DNA analysis, only fingerprints, rudimentary blood typing, and old-fashioned police legwork. The killer's apparent lack of motive confounded efforts to predict or prevent further tragedies. Some theorized the crimes were sexually motivated, but many experts believed otherwise, suggesting greed, anger, a lust for power, or a random compulsion. No clear psychological profile or rationale for the violence could be established. Even as the city's nerves frayed and the senses of fear and helplessness mounted, Mackay continued to evade capture. The murders were notable for their extreme brutality. In one of his last crimes, Mackay used an axe to kill with many blows to the head, indicating a level of savagery beyond that seen in typical criminal acts. The media, the police, and the public alike began to regard the phrase cold-blooded as particularly apt for such an individual. Looking back, those who knew Patrick Mackay in his youth would recall subtle but telling signs of fascination with violence, emotional coldness, and cruelty that, in hindsight, foreshadowed his later crimes. For the affluent communities of Chelsea, Knightsbridge, and beyond, the legacy of his killing spree was a grim reminder that even the wealthiest and most secure environments could become the backdrop for terror and tragedy. The pursuit, capture, and prosecution of Patrick Mackay would become one of the most notorious chapters in British criminal history, demonstrating both the limits of law enforcement in the face of unpredictable violence and the resilience of a city shaken to its core. In the midst of London's turmoil in the 1970s,
all the victims were vulnerable. 2 very elderly ladies and a man of the clergy, alone in their homes, extremely vulnerable, in places where they probably thought they were the safest.
the Metropolitan Police were overwhelmed by a chilling sequence of murders that defied explanation. 2 women had already been viciously killed inside their own homes, sending shockwaves through the city and leaving the police grappling for answers. Despite intense efforts, no clear leads or discernible motives emerged, and the killer remained elusive. Then, unexpectedly, the violence spilled beyond the metropolitan streets into a quiet village on the outskirts of the city. Shorne, a peaceful and picturesque community near Gravesend, known for its close-knit spirit and calm surroundings, suddenly confronted a horror it had never imagined possible. At the heart of this village was Father Anthony Crean, a beloved priest who lived at the Corpus Christi residence called the Mort House, where 12 devoted nuns also lived. Father Crean was well regarded for his compassion and dedication, often visiting parishioners with his faithful Jack Russell Terrier. Jack, by his side. His presence was a comforting constant for many in Shaun.
The road here in the quiet village of Shaun is where Mackay chased Father Crean through the fields here with an axe and brutally murdered him in his cottage.
This tranquility was shattered on March 21, 1975. That night, Detective Inspector Ken Tappenden was attending a formal black tie event in Maidstone when he was notified by Gravesend police that Father Crean had not returned home, though his dog had. As darkness deepened and worrying grew, Tappenden and his colleagues urgently set out for Shaun, unprepared for the grisly scene awaiting them. They found Father Crean's body in the bathtub, floating in a macabre mixture of blood and water, still dressed in his coat, boots, and woolly hat. The priest had been killed in a brutal frenzy with a medieval-style axe whose blood-soaked blade was discovered concealed beneath the stairs beside the bathroom. The violent attack left the police shaken, reaffirming that they were dealing with a killer of terrifying savagery. News of the priest's murder spread swiftly through the village, leaving its residents in disbelief and mourning. The idyllic charm of their community was forever tarnished, as they grappled with the reality that such evil had come to their doorsteps. Haunted by the killing, D. Tappenden recalled an old case linking Father Crean to a troubled young man named Patrick Mackay. The priest had once tried to help Mackay stay out of trouble, only to be betrayed when Mackay had stolen and cashed a forged check belonging to Crean. Mackay's volatile reaction during the fraud investigation had unsettled the police, planting the seed of suspicion. Acting on this memory, Tappenden instructed two officers to locate Mackay, who was believed to be living in a hostel for ex-offenders on London's Great North Road. Though he was not there, the hostel's manager revealed that Mackay had been staying with a family named Cowdery, information that became critical as the investigation intensified toward capturing the man at the center of these horrifying crimes. After exhausting every investigative avenue, the police had no choice but to turn to the electoral register, painstakingly searching for all the families residing in South London. In a remarkable stroke of luck, their persistence paid off when the very first door they knocked on proved to be the right one. Inside the house sat Patrick Mackay himself, casually on the sofa, seemingly unaware that his arrest was imminent. Upon confrontation, Mackay quickly confessed to the murder, but what shocked the detectives even more was his willingness to continue, revealing a litany of crimes that left the officers stunned. The question that arose was, who exactly was this man, seemingly capable of such horrific and bloody violence? Patrick David Mackay was born on September 25, 1952, in Dotford. He was raised in a troubled home alongside his parents and two younger sisters. Childhood friends like Roland Hayes remembered him as a disruptive presence, a little terrorist even among school children. Mackay had been placed in what would now be called a special needs class, but in those days, he was simply regarded as a troublemaker. His violent tendencies were evident even on the playground. He would ambush girls unexpectedly, pinching or pushing them before running off laughing, showing a disturbing pleasure in causing pain. Mackay's childhood was fraught with stress and dysfunction. His mother, Marion, was a Creole woman from Guyana, while his father, Harold Mackay, was a Second World War veteran who bore deep psychological scars. Harold often recounted brutal war stories to Patrick, stories of violence and death that might have imprinted a warped sense of reality onto the young boy. Though outwardly mild-mannered as an accountant, Harold's trauma manifested in alcoholism and violent behavior at home, frequently assaulting his wife and son. Fortunately, his two daughters escaped his direct abuse. Growing up amid such domestic violence, young Patrick absorbed troubling lessons about power and control. The father's aggression, bullying, and volatility taught Patrick that dominance often came through intimidation and cruelty. Signs of Patrick's dark proclivities emerged early. particularly his sadistic treatment of animals. He regularly tortured neighborhood pets and wildlife, tearing the wings off birds, setting a tortoise on fire, even discarding the tortured corpse over fences. Such cruel acts are often early indicators of individuals who later escalate to human violence, as they seek living beings they can dominate and experiment on. Mackay's disturbing behavior was noticed by schoolmates. One recalled an incident when Patrick filled a flower with his urine and drank from it, shocking those around him just for the sake of provocation. His personality seemed fractured, a split between moments of seeming normalcy and sudden bursts of reckless, criminal mischief, like snatching items from shops or knocking over strangers' belongings before blending back into the crowd as if nothing had happened. As Mackay grew older, his strange and increasingly extreme behavior escalated in both intensity and scope. His violent and erratic tendencies would later horrify the nation and earn him the grim distinction of being one of Britain's most dangerous men. Behind the facade of a troubled youth lay a mind twisted by childhood trauma and deeply embedded psychopathic traits that would culminate in a trail of bloodshed across London and its outskirts. In the early 1970s, London was gripped by an unsettling wave of muggings and murders that culminated in 1975 with the chilling discovery of Catholic priest Father Crean's body, found floating in a bath filled with his own blood. The police swiftly arrested 22-year-old Patrick David Mackay in connection with the priest's brutal murder. As investigators delved into Mackay's background, they uncovered a disturbing history marked by madness and violence. When Patrick was just 10 years old, a pivotal event profoundly impacted his already unstable life. His father, Harold Mackay, left for work one morning after telling young Patrick to remember to be good. On his way to his office in London, Harold suffered a fatal heart attack. He never returned home, and Patrick never saw him again. He did not attend his father's funeral, which took place in Scotland, leaving an absence of closure that would haunt him. In every meaningful sense, Harold had simply vanished from Patrick's life. The death of his father ripped a massive hole in Patrick's world. His identification with his father was so strong that following Harold's death, Patrick seemed to begin assuming his father's troubled traits. Almost immediately, he took over his father's armchair and became the household bully, physically abusing his mother and sisters, mirroring the violent behavior Harold had exhibited. Those who knew Patrick before and after his father's death noticed an intensification in his emotional volatility. Though already difficult, his behavior grew more excitable and unstable. His mother, Marion Mackay, found life increasingly unbearable after Harold's passing. The family relocated to Gravesend, but the turmoil only deepened. Patrick was perpetually angry, and it didn't take much to set him off. Police were often called to the Mackay household due to domestic disturbances, many instigated by Patrick's violent outbursts. He regularly assaulted his sisters and mother, screamed loudly enough to alarm neighbors, and provoked repeated intervention from law enforcement. Local officers, such as Amy Tapp, became familiar with the family's troubles, frequently attending incidents at the home, sometimes as often as 4 times a week. Tapp described Patrick as a caged animal, deeply disturbed and mentally unstable. Despite understanding him well enough to sometimes calm him, she feared he was a danger to others and believed he should be confined to prevent harm. In response to these escalating problems, Patrick was placed in numerous institutions aimed at regulating his behavior. However, his home life remained volatile. Against all evidence of his instability, his mother persistently campaigned to have him released from these facilities and brought home, succeeding many times. Paradoxically, the household was only stable during his absences. His returns invariably triggered upheaval and chaos. From age 12 to 22, Patrick moved in and out of various special schools, juvenile remand centers, psychiatric units, and prisons on no fewer than 18 occasions. Despite spending significant time in mental hospitals, no one seemed able or willing to fully recognize or address the severity of his personality disorder. Institutionalization often worsened his condition rather than improved it. While confined, he exhibited destructive behavior, such as tearing slates off hospital roofs and enduring physical punishment and isolation in approved schools. These harsh conditions fostered resentment and further alienated him, failing to provide any meaningful rehabilitation.
And do you feel at the time of the offence you were a psychopath or behaving psychopathically?
From the point of view of somebody who is supposedly using that label to enjoy taking human life, there was never, ever any suggestion in my mind that I was ever a psychopath, if one used to use that criterion. I could have perhaps understood some people being rather uncertain as to whether or not I was. But I certainly have never considered myself psychopathic if one takes the criteria that one gets a special enjoyment out of killing. No such enjoyment have I ever had. I've never found any pleasure out of any such thing.
Early mental health assessments labeled Patrick Mackay a psychopath. He demonstrated an alarming lack of any meaningful interpersonal bonds or attachments. More than just socially detached, he was strikingly antisocial, exhibiting traits that would later underpin his violent and remorseless behavior, ultimately making him one of the most notorious criminals in Britain's history. Patrick Mackay found himself locked in a relentless battle against a harsh and unforgiving system, one ill-equipped to manage his turbulent and violent nature. Authorities and psychiatrists alike were confounded by his behavior, unable to devise a strategy that could control or rehabilitate him. Instead of improving, Mackay's violence and depravity escalated. Beyond a long history of petty crimes, Mackay turned to arson, sometimes setting fire to churches, houses, cars, or fields. He derived a disturbing sense of power and satisfaction from watching the destruction, sent repeatedly to approved schools. One teacher at such an institution described the 15-year-old Mackay as a potential murderer of women, a chilling prediction that went unheeded when he was allowed to return home. By 1968, at age 16, Mackay was officially diagnosed as a psychopath, exhibiting antisocial behavior and an alarming lack of remorse. Modern understanding suggests that psychopaths have distinct neurological differences affecting their decision-making and emotional responses. His erratic behavior landed him in psychiatric hospitals multiple times, including Moss Side, where he demanded to be called Franklin Boldvogt I, a name he claimed should inspire fear and remembrance akin to notorious figures like Hitler. Mackay developed a profound and unsettling fascination with the Nazi regime and its atrocities. This interest stemmed not from ideology, but from a morbid desire to inflict pain and commit horrors similar to those committed by the Nazis. Photographs showed him displaying a swastika tattooed on his arm, and his room was adorned with Nazi memorabilia, effectively serving as a shrine. Despite this obsession with Aryan purity, Mackay was himself a quarter black, an ironic contrast to the beliefs he seemed to emulate. Given his background and escalating violent behavior, it was no surprise that Mackay became the prime suspect when Detective Inspector Ken Tappenden investigated the brutal murder of Father Anthony Crean. Once taken into custody, Mackay's fingerprints were matched to the unsolved murder of Adele Price, linking him definitively to at least one case that had baffled the Metropolitan Police for over a year. The police investigation intensified, revealing Mackay as the perpetrator behind a succession of brutal murders across London. Mackay confessed to several killings, with his own words guiding authorities to verify several cases. Among the victims were Heidi Manelk, whom he violently threw from a train at Catford; Frank Goodman, a tobacconist bludgeoned to death during a robbery in North London, and Mrs. Hines, murdered near Hackney Theatre. A crime Mackay chillingly described as easy as washing my socks. Gradually, the pattern became clear. Mackay was responsible for the series of robberies, assaults, and murders of vulnerable elderly women in affluent neighborhoods, as well as the killing of the Catholic priest. The police began to understand his motives. He targeted elderly women because they were easier victims, unlikely to fight back. His charm and plausible demeanor enabled him to establish trust with well-to-do, middle-class seniors who welcomed him into their homes, sometimes even inviting him to stay for tea, unaware of the danger he posed. While this explained many crimes, the murder of Father Crean, a man who had tried to help him, remained perplexing. Among Mackay's belongings, police discovered photo booth pictures taken just the day before the priest's murder, underscoring the premeditated nature of the attack and revealing the disturbing depths of Mackay's depravity. The photos that Patrick Mackay took before the murder of Father Crean revealed a man snarling, with his hands clawed like a cat, and eyes that seemed vacant, images that portrayed a deeply schizophrenic and profoundly troubled individual. It became clear to many that the only place for someone like Mackay was in custody or incarceration. Medically, Mackay often described himself as feeling peculiar, particularly in the days before and after committing a murder, suggesting a disturbed mental state. While he did not seem to revel in his crimes, it was unclear whether even he fully understood his actions. In the village of Shorne, just a short distance from Father Crean's home, it was well known that the priest frequented the Rose and Crown public house, sometimes accompanied by Mackay. Mackay was gifted at identifying vulnerable individuals and preying upon them. Although Father Crean had been kind and supportive toward him, Mackay equated this kindness with weakness and ultimately attacked the priest. Observers believe that Mackay's murder of Father Crean was an experiment in the escalation of aggression, testing how far he could push his violence and how it affected him emotionally, whether with disgust or dark satisfaction. Mackay later recounted how, after killing the priest, he filled the bath with water and blood and calmly watched the battered body float for over an hour, describing the experience as oddly calming and wonderful, an unsettling indication of his disturbed psyche. Similar behavior was noted in other murders. With Isabella Griffiths, he lingered with the body, filling the sink with crockery and shoes, while with Adele Price, he lingered, listened to the radio, and even fell asleep in a chair while her body lay nearby. Such actions offered no clear or rational explanation. Mackay also described other acts of violence, such as throwing a drunken man over Hungerford Bridge, recalling the act with disturbing pleasure. His violent tendencies and psychopathic nature were unmistakable, but the question remained, was he truly born to kill? Arrested in 1975 for the brutal murder of Father Crean, Mackay was subsequently labelled by the media as the most dangerous man in Britain. His history of institutionalization and traumatic upbringing, marked by an alcoholic and violent father and a volatile mother, had left deep scars on his character and personality. The repeated cycles of psychiatric confinement, untroubled family life clearly took their toll. Despite clear signs of his dangerousness, authorities released Mackay, only for him to continue his killing spree. Although police believed he had committed as many as 13 murders, they were able to definitively prove only 3, those of Isabella Griffiths, Adele Price, and Father Anthony Crean. When Mackay appeared at the Old Bailey, his courtroom presence was chilling. A man who seemed detached from his own body, as if possessed by something malevolent. Journalists dubbed him the Devil's Disciple, a moniker many found fitting given the nature of his crimes. Sentenced to life imprisonment for manslaughter due to diminished responsibility, questions lingered about whether Mackay was born to kill. Experts suggested that while no one is inherently born evil, Mackay possessed a strong predisposition toward antisocial behavior. Many believed his murders were not premeditated, but triggered by sudden fits of rage. His violent upbringing, particularly abuse from his father, appeared to shape his responses and relationships, creating a cycle of violence that was both environmental and psychological. Ultimately, Mackay was a frightening embodiment of evil during his crime spree, obsessed and overtaken by darkness. His crimes seemed impulsive rather than deliberate, making him all the more terrifying. While it is uncertain whether he was literally born to kill, from around the age of 10, he was on a path of violence that repeatedly led to death.
Where normally perhaps they would have been nicked in another establishment, they don't get nicked in here. But it's not just about that, it's about the fact that we get them to explain their behaviour away, we talk them through it.
Don't be too precious with it, bash it about a bit.
Attitudes may stay the same.
Thank you for watching this deep dive into the chilling story of Patrick Mackay, one of Britain's most notorious and disturbing criminals. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more true crime stories and in-depth investigations. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Mackay was born to kill, or were his actions shaped by his troubled past? Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.